issues are going on right now. So give a big round of applause to Greg Ugalde and Jim Tobin.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So welcome everybody. It's nice to be here. When you start on the ladder at NAHB, just so that everybody recognizes how we are set up, you join at your local level. That's the grassroots. You work at your local level, you move up to your state level, you get involved, that's more state lobbying, and you do some different, you're exposed to different issues at that level. And then at the national level, the level of the federation, which represents the whole country, that's what the building systems efforts that you're doing these couple days, that's what we do in DC and we bring to Capitol Hill, and that's what Jim and I are going to talk about. So when I was here as your third vice chairman, it's very near and dear to me what you do and why it's so important what you do. When I look at this, having been BuildPAC chairman, and you know, we talked about that, how everything ties in, there's a lot of similarities, and Jim and I have talked about this, that we're always looking for participation in BuildPAC. We're looking to see how we can help the country by looking at Megan's team. Megan Everingham is one of the best in the country. When we go to the debates, when we go to different functions, she's talking to all our members across the country for BuildPAC. You have an event here. You're doing raffles and different things. And it's important because that's really where what Jim and I are going to talk about today originates, and that's the support that we need in order to do that. But building systems, you're also looking at that, you can track the percentages of participation in the marketplace. They're very similar actually. So with all the attributes and strengths that this industry has, the ability to control labor force, the building environment itself, being able to control those conditions, to be able to, we'll talk a little bit more about resiliency and things like that, but you could be the tip of the spear on so many of those issues. So Jim, why don't you just chime in here on in those topics?
Well, as Greg said, I think the importance of NAHB in what we do at the national level is to tie everything together. We are the trade association for building across the spectrum. I just had a meeting yesterday with my counterparts, CEOs, and the elected leadership of what we refer to as big housing, so to speak. It was NAHB, the Mortgage Bankers Association, the National Association of Realtors, and the American Bankers Association. We have a group that gets together twice a year to talk about the issues that are important to housing.
We call it the group.
The group, yeah, big T, big G. So interestingly, when we sit around that table, everyone has their niche, and housing affordability is obviously the key of the main topic of that meeting. But no one else is worried about what it takes to build a house and what it takes to deliver affordability to the customer. The bankers, we love the bankers, we need them, they're necessary to the system, but they're worried about interest rates, they're worried about making sure they're delivering the product that they need for people to afford a home. The realtors, they're a necessary part of the system too. We need them to sell their homes. But at the end of the day, there's only one association that's truly worried about the supply side of housing and the cost to the customers, and that's what we do. And that's why Greg's year has been so influential in Washington D.C. And I've been happy to be with Greg through the whole subject. The housing affordability has been the key mantra for him this year. Dean Mon, who's going to take over the chair next year, he's going to continue Greg's year. And so as we've worked through these last 10 months or 9 months of the year so far, with this administration and this Congress, we continue to make strides in housing affordability. And Greg, as he said, he's been all over the country attending some of the Democratic debates in order to get our message in front of the Democratic presidential candidates. He's been in and out of the White House, up on Capitol Hill. We've got him running everywhere with the main goal of promoting housing affordability, whether it's as you said, labor, whether it's regulations, and it's been a key from the minute you came in February of this year.
Yeah, it's so interesting too, because you can tell. I mean, we work hand in hand all year long, and our staff is second to none. inside the Beltway and around the country. And that's so important because we can map out these strides that we're taking in getting in front of the right people. So starting in February, we brought out housing affordability, and it's really caught fire. Never before have two chairmen back-to-back kept the same theme, and Dean will be following with Housing Affordability 2020 to get into the election cycle. It's that critical. We have people listening at all levels. I myself, they've gotten me into the White House 3 times this year. You know, you do a lot of great things as a senior officer and as you work your way up the ladder to chairman, but I've got to tell you, being in the White House is something special. You know, we're in the Rose Garden. I got to sing happy birthday to the president. Pictures with the vice president. We did the American presidency movie where I walked in the portico and he's filming me until he got it. It's great stuff. It looks like the movie. Only ours was a much better version, I think. So, but then, you know, we brought some students over from HBI and the endowment, how we're educating the workforce, and they got their picture taken with the vice president. That's where the president has taken, signed an executive order last year. They have 12 million pledges to train 12 million young workers, students around the country, and there's over 300 companies involved. We, as a federation, have pledged to train over 50,000, and we'll, Ed Brady's team and Mark Purcell with the endowment and does the HBI part, will train far in excess of that, but it's outstanding. But the third time I was in the White House was actually in the Oval Office, which is quite special. And that's where he signed, President Trump signed the executive order on affordable housing, his efforts and what he's going to do. We call it housing affordability. We, you know, make sure that it's our words that are used in that. But so many times these guys are actually writing what is in those executive orders, what's on the agendas and different things. But this is going to be 8 of the federal agencies are headed by our good friend and my personal friend, Secretary Carson. Ben Carson is pulling together, and what they're looking for is duplication of regulations around the country, and also those regulations that just simply lead to increased costs of housing for no apparent benefit other than let's out-regulate ourselves. And so we're keeping an eye on that. We're getting entrenched in that as we're moving forward, like anything in government, especially with some of the other things that are being talked about on Capitol Hill. Some of these things take a little bit longer to get the legs, but we're starting to see it now, and we're front and center on that effort as well.
And I think the other aspect of the executive order is not only the federal regulations, but how do we get to the local and state regulations that really impact building on a day-to-day basis? And what are the levers in Congress, or I'm sorry, what are the levers we can use from the administration to actually drive better behavior and lowering those housing regulations at the local level? In fact, we're working with them to suggest some, either you incentivize local governments and either do that by sending them money, or more importantly, maybe withholding some money of those federal dollars, especially transportation dollars. Every community needs transportation dollars, whether it's bridges and roads, and federal transportation dollars make up a bulk of that. But is there a way to tie being smarter at the regulation of housing to those federal dollars? So if you want to get that taste from the federal government, you need to be doing the right thing to encouraging the creation of more supply of housing at the local and state level. So that's one of the other aspects of this executive order that I'm really excited about, and trying to find those ways to make it easier for you all to build on the ground where you build.
And you know, I mean, so many of us come from areas where home rule is really the key, and that's what we have to focus on and address. You know, we'll go through some of the things that we consider being components of housing affordability. It's really overwhelming. You know, because for example, you start with codes and federal regulations, and so we start with a number that if you look at the price of a home, it's on average 25% of the fair market value has to do with conforming to regulations. Regulatory compliance consists of 25% of your purchase price. You go to California, it's upwards of 40+%. That's how serious this is. And there's all things in there like your labor piece, financing, products, we'll start to go through some of those things, but start with one. We'll talk about for a second codes and resiliency, and the fact that if we're not careful, we're going to be facing legislation at times that deal with just the most current code being the end all. What we need to have for our members across the country are at least 2 code cycles to consider, and plus being able to amend it at a local level. Local amendments are key. That's where you see a lot of our battles with sprinklers being fought. That's where you see your climates being taken into consideration. And it's critical. Codes, we run spreadsheets. Jim and I talk about this. We run spreadsheets in my office for every code change, and my son actually does a lot of it. And he'll come running in and look at this. Can you believe this? Do they know it's $1,200 on houses this size? To support the garage, make sure it's tied down. What are we going to need? Like 2 tornadoes to come through to affect this? And it gets serious, and it's real numbers that we have to pass on to the buyers. And when you have to put them into so many of the process that you use into the homes that ultimately we can only sell for what consumers are willing to pay us for, people don't realize that it's not like we just absorb these costs and say, okay, everything's fine, we'll just keep the market moving forward. It doesn't work that way. And that's why you see in parts of the country, and that's what's so interesting when we travel around. The senior officers, and Jerry Howard we include besides your 5 elected, we will be in every state. That's our challenge. We cover regions and we cover for each other, but at the end of the year, we'll be able to check off every state we will have been in. And make sure when you go home too, yes, go ahead, please.
Greg, you mentioned that. One of the things that maybe as an industry would be a lot more revealing is if we could kind of educate the consumers about, hey, when you buy the house, X number of money goes to just follow the local rules, because I think most people don't really realize that. Those are staggering numbers.
We started to do that actually with my company. We call it the sticker, like on a car.
Right.
So we actually put those costs. When you go to a hotel, for example, and you have those 5 added fees that are another $50 a night, right? Well, with houses, people think that we're putting the entire price into our companies. It doesn't work that way. When you get done with conveyance taxes, and you get done with all your local taxes and your code provisions, the inspection fees, you start outlining them, and you're right. You talk about sticker shock and pushback, and it happens where we start looking toward our kids, our grandkids, and families being able to live in near the communities where you need them. First responders, everybody. I serve on this Home Connecticut Steering Committee, and the concept is let's drive costs down for homes by increasing density. It's really, when you boil it down, it's government sitting there, it's a couple of us only are for-profit, but it's a bunch of nonprofits. It's a great group. We come to the realization that if we can incentivize that and get it in areas where towns look, where transportation, where the infrastructure is available, we're ahead of the game. Let's identify those places. Let's get some density there on the systems that exist and drive the prices down. It's so simple, and it's starting to catch on, and we're seeing that concept being used around the country. Jim?
Yeah, just going back to the codes piece for a minute, I think one of the interesting dynamics that I've seen over the last several years is that for the first time in many years, as long as I've been in NAHB, we're starting to see codes, which has always been the purview of the state and local governments and state and local code writing bodies, really become a federal issue. And it's very bipartisan. You've got Republicans on one side of the aisle who are tired of paying out taxpayer dollars to disaster areas when homes are flooded, homes are knocked down from a hurricane or a tornado, and they're asking themselves, why aren't we building to higher building standards in order to keep these homes, make them more resilient, and we don't have to keep shelling out federal dollars. We're going to protect the taxpayer dollars. The Democrats on the other side, they're worried about climate change. They're worried about these superstorms They keep popping up every couple of years or more frequently than that even. And they're driving more and more water and wind and rain into these coastal areas. And why aren't the homes more resilient? We've got to protect ourselves against sea level rise. We've got to protect ourselves against these superstorms. We need to build to the latest published codes. And what you have is the left and the right kind of backing around to each other. And all of a sudden there's these bipartisan efforts to increase codes across the country and using the federal government to do that. I talked about the incentives, whether you withhold money or give money. There's more and more efforts to give money to states in order to bring their codes up to the latest published code. And one of the challenges that we have is that the model codes that are developed by the ICC and the IECC every 3 years are an important tool. We participate as NAHB, our members participate in that code writing process. But then those codes are then taken, and then you all get your hands in them at the state and local level. And isn't that the appropriate place to do them? Not necessarily driving the latest published codes or the Department of Energy itself in essentially writing the codes in the country. I've been told by people on Capitol Hill, well, you know a national energy code is coming. You should embrace it. I said, well, I don't think any of our members believe there should be a national code. And no, I don't believe that the federal government should establish a one-size-fits-all energy code for the country, as we know all the regions in the country are different. So those are one of the different issues. And to your point earlier about why don't we just delineate on the house, we've talked about that in a variety of different ways. You'd be surprised that realtors do not want you to put a sticker on their house talking about energy efficiency. Why don't you want to do that? Because the house that you all build and Greg builds, those are the most energy efficient homes on the market today. The home we build tomorrow is more energy efficient than the home we built yesterday, generally speaking, right? You start putting stickers on homes that talk about the cost and the energy efficiency in a new home, guess what happens? All of those older homes that were built probably before, 2003, probably 2000, right? All of a sudden, those are energy hogs. The true energy problem we have in this country is the built environment the built environment from decades ago. The house, I live in a house that was built in 1985. I'm pretty darn sure it's much more energy inefficient than the home that was built, 2 years behind me in the next subdivision. I'm fairly confident of that. But you start labeling homes, and all of a sudden the realtors, people aren't going to want to buy as many homes out there, or at least existing homes.
Maybe they'll buy a new one.
So
I like a new home, but then we are but then isn't that the challenge, right?
Yeah.
Then the supply side really comes into things,
They have to
right?
sell their home.
We have to sell their home. We have to sell their home to buy our product. But the challenges are we're not building enough product. We've got hundreds of thousands of units in a shortfall right now, and that's where we kind of wrap affordability back into it. See how it all ties together with a nice little bow, right?
So, but what's very interesting is the studies that we commission ourselves and the studies that are being done, you go into some of these areas that have been hit by a natural disaster. All the houses that are standing and in their best shape are the ones that we recently built. There's no magic to it. Like Jim said, we're building to better codes today. Our code process, we talked a little bit about the legislative side. On the code development side, we have a tremendous track record, and that's the part that works so well for us. Our codes guys within the Federation do such an unbelievable job. We knock out the 27 top provisions that make it to our hit list. We knock those out 100% of them. After that, we're about 83–84% successful getting everything that we promote and oppose dealt with in the codes. It's a tremendous track record, and it's a long process. Dean and I, your first vice chairman, will speak at the codes board of directors meeting on the 19th, right before we're in New Orleans. We'll stop in Las Vegas. We'll speak there. Our codes guys come in for the following week and address this. So we have a great position on these codes, but it's important that we stay on top of it. And just continuing a little bit on the materials, Jim, remember at the beginning of 17 when we saw lumber prices start escalating? By the middle of 18, we had seen a 63% increase. So we met with Secretary of Treasury Mnuchin. We met with all the administrative agencies. Yeah.
Secretary Ross and Commerce.
Yeah, Ross was really the key because actually Secretary Mnuchin told us that. So it was at the end of the day, we were able to get our arms around that. But with the scare in knowing that the increase that still survived that was real, and the lumber did rise to the level where the lumber suppliers needed it to be, but it also was a roadmap for so many other products in our industry. And especially for this group, where, you know, we see the difficulties when you sign a contract and you're delivering a product built on a certain set of assumptions. You start throwing up increases like that, and you can really bust the system pretty quickly when you start having double-digit increases during that time period of production. Never mind upwards of 63% for such a major component of what we do.
Have you all seen increases since that we've kind of started these trade wars with China and the EU? I mean, I talked to one of our builders 2 weeks ago. I talked to Chuck, and his tile manufacturer sent him a note saying his tile prices went up 100%. And they directly attributed that to China and the China trade war. So that's one of the issues. You know, Greg mentioned the Canadian lumber issue. I think we were very fortunate very effective in our advocacy efforts to take that 63% increase in Canadian lumber prices, or so just lumber prices in general,
yeah,
and watch those bottom out over the course of a year. I think that was really important for our industry and the affordability side. But the Chinese tariffs, we're now inching closer to 25 and 35% on a lot of products. I mean, we're looking at billions of dollars that directly impact this industry. Directly impact this industry to the tune of, you know, hundreds, if not, you know, ticking over $1,000 per house just on this trade war. And I know we talk to the administration. We're always kind of give them a little tweak on the trade side. We have got to get to a resolution with China. I know they're coming to town, I think, next week. Hopefully we'll wrap it up. I think the president needs a win on China, given a variety of other activities that are out there now. The USMCA deal, that's another one. We were very supportive of the new NAFTA 2.0 deal. That is starting to get some real legs, and we may actually see a vote on that in the House of Representatives. I put a bow on that within the next month or so. I think right before Thanksgiving they're talking about. Because the Democrats, again, I haven't said the I word yet, but I will, impeachment, they're anxious to try to put some wins on the board so that they're not just viewed as the party of impeachment. So I am optimistic that we may see some increased activity on the trade side, which I think is another affordability issue that we've been hammering on. That's where we have a lot of alignment with this White House. This is one of the big issues where we don't have alignment with them.
You know, and it's interesting, Jim, because if you remember some of the inside baseball that you'd be interested in, so I have senior officer calls every other week, and if we need emergency issues to be dealt with in between that, we do that as well. But we were face-to-face for this meeting. We started talking about the tariffs, and I challenged Dr. Dietz. I said, Rob, look, you know, we're sitting here at senior management and your senior officers. Can you give us a rough estimate where we're going with these increases? I never told you this. Give you a rough estimate where we're headed with the numbers. So Rob goes out, you know, you guys crunch numbers, come back, and it comes back with the exact number that's starting to play out now. So for our average houses, it's between $1,700 and $2,000 extra per house with these tariff increases.
I can't believe you haven't told me this. I'm hurt, actually, that you haven't told me this.
I just found out before this trip.
Oh,
These guys run me around. I got in 2:30 last night, but this is what we go through. It's interesting. A lot of times we're texting while we're sitting on planes and things. But that's true, and I can't believe how close he came when you look. But when you think about it, it's pretty logical, right? You go down the list of your components and your standard features and your upgrades, and then you look at how tariffs are going to hit us. But we need to get our arms around that. So those are components of housing affordability. Let's talk a little bit, just to finish up on the workforce development piece and just kind of put a bow on that. That is something where I think this group, everybody knows the challenges around the country that we have. And it's different. Like in the busy areas, it's easy to understand why labor is such an issue. Like, you know, we're standing at IBS and somebody comes up to me and says, I have to run back to the job because if I don't, they're passing out Benjamins to get, my siders and framers over to their job site for the afternoon. I said, you're kidding me, signing bonuses for that? And that's how tough it is to keep labor active on your job site, or you're gonna lose them that very day. In New England, the Northeast, and other parts of the country, it's not quite like that, but our labor difficulties are family businesses trying to weigh whether or not it's worth bringing other family members and keeping their businesses alive. As those businesses retrain, relocate, redirect their talent, it becomes a drain. When we look at the average age around the country is around 59 years old for plumbers and electricians. In certain areas like ours, it's even a little bit older. That is a tough vacuum to fill. Carpentry. What we do when we talk to our young students and people, trying to get them to think about working with their hands, educating their families and their parents especially, that it's honorable to run your own business, even to get involved in our industry, take pride in it. You can start in carpentry at an average of $50,000 around the country, carpentry, with all those potential entrepreneurial endeavors in front of you. And for plumbing and electricians, since we're on that, upwards of $60,000 to start. When I do the awards banquet with the high school and colleges that compete at IBS, it's wonderful. The room's over 800 people, music playing, everybody's into it. We give scholarships for a lot of those students to participate. The jobs that I can also use are the ones that are at the management level. They're starting at $90,000. Kids coming right out of college at that level. It's the few programs that we have in colleges around the country. So you back up. We start in the junior high schools. We start in the high schools. We get the curriculums back in, like the shop classes that we all used to take and things. We start getting people to think in that mindset, and we take a run at filling. As we sit here, 380,000 job openings in our industry as we sit here. And we're starting to fill them. We're making some runs at it.
Yeah, Greg cited that number. We've seen a peak over 400,000 within the last year, and as Greg said, it's 380 right now. The latest numbers came out. It's the biggest challenge I think we face from the affordability perspective. Labor is about 25% of the cost of a house if you think about it. So it's a huge issue for us. This White House, as Greg said, we've committed to this White House. Their larger effort. This is the first time that I can remember an administration actually embracing the trades to the extent of telling people you don't have to go to a four-year college to be successful in this country anymore. I mean, the President of the United States saying that and then trying to put the dollars and put the industry behind him in that effort to do that. I know we've seen a lot on the Democratic, we'll call it a little politics as we wrap up. But if you look at the Democratic side of the field, a lot of it seems to be giving, loan forgiveness for student loans for colleges. I haven't heard a lot about the trades yet when it comes to the Democratic side, but I've been impressed with this president who's really embraced workforce development as a key, they call it a platform for this administration. And we've been very, very active in that. But I think that's where, when I look out at you all this morning, I think you're part of the labor solution in the country. Is the products that you build don't need as much labor as they do in a traditionally stick-built home.
Controlled environment.
Yeah, and so I think when we talked to, Greg mentioned Rob Dietz, our chief economist, when he looks at the continuing labor problems, and yes, it'd be great if we could get a zero on the construction open jobs rate, but the reality is that we've got to have a generational shift in this country, whether it's parents or guidance counselors and even the kids themselves, to say that, all right, if I don't need to go to a four-year college to be successful, take on that student loan debt, let me go into the trades to solve some of that labor problem.
And it's interesting, right? Because you show up in a new car, you're the first one to be able to afford a house and a family. One of the stats that we borrow from HUD is in the last 15 years, we've added 5 years to the average age of the first-time buyer. So when it was 25, 26 years old, now it's 30, 31. What that means is most of us look at a 2.5-year cycle That's the average. I love that half-year thing, you know. But that's the average that people are staying in their homes. So instead of being on the third closing, we're like, you know, just getting people starting, fortifying their personal wealth, their involvement in the community, in the American dream of home ownership. So that little delay is also really affecting our industry and overall affordability. But let's talk a little bit too about the financing piece. You know, we need AD&C financing. That's acquisition, development, and construction financing piece from our standpoint to be able to put the products in place. But we also need a good loan package that our buyers can qualify for and afford at the end of the day. And there's a number of things going on with finance reform and different things that deeply affect our industry.
Yeah, after the Great Recession, we're now, let's see, 11 years deep into the Great Recession. Fannie and Freddie, the big mortgage behemoths in the country, and as well as FHA and the VA and rural housing. The government essentially controls 85 to 90% of the mortgage market in the country. That's really unhealthy. We need a much more robust private sector to get back into it. You know, pre-recession, let's be honest, we probably got away with some. Not we. I mean the housing industry was doing some bad stuff, and they eventually got caught in a house of cards. But now underwriting standards are so much better. We need to rebalance the housing finance system in this country. Fannie and Freddie have been in conservatorship, essentially receivership, conservatorship for 11 years. Last time I checked, conservatorship was supposed to be a temporary situation, not a decade-long situation. We're starting to see this administration unwind Fannie and Freddie. We're starting to see them getting prepared to be turned back into the wild, so to speak. The good news is that they're not going to look the same way that they looked before the crash. That's, I think, really, really important. Like I said, underwriting standards are better. There's a much more robust regulatory box that they're in. But nonetheless, we are getting ready to hopefully see kind of a rejuvenation of the housing finance system where Wall Street's going to have much more of a level playing field, so to speak, with the government in pricing of mortgages where they're going to feel comfortable moving back in. And the government can start slowly, I'm talking about protecting the taxpayer when it comes to hurricanes and things like that. There's as much that as well in the housing finance system. If the government is underwriting 80 or 90% of the loans, that means the taxpayer is on the hook for 80 or 90% of the loans here. And as Fannie and Freddie get returned, as I said, into the wild, I think we're going to see that rebalancing, and I think that's really important for us.
Yeah, thanks for that. You mentioned a little bit kind of around that notion of the finance. What are your thoughts around the flood insurance issue?
Sure.
And I live in Florida. I'm like 9 feet above.
That's next on the agenda, actually, to talk about.
And sometimes there's these conflicting. I know it's pressure of lots to build, but we're still keeping rebuilding in these same places, and I don't think we're making. Well, I guess builders get to rebuild the things to sell multiple times and get insurance money, but. What are your thoughts on that? We shouldn't build in flood places, right?
So, no, I disagree with that. No, we should be building. Here's the
part of it's on the infrastructure.
Yeah, here's what I think. And I'm originally from Connecticut, and I live in Virginia, outside of Washington D.C. And when they settled in Roanoke Island years ago, and they settled in Plymouth just centuries ago, or whatever. They built America around coastlines and rivers, right? That was where the commerce of the nation started before we built roads and bridges and train tracks and airplanes. They built around the best means of transportation, that was waterways and trade and the coastal communities. If we could go backwards and start over again, maybe we would all build in Kansas. Well, who wants to live in Kansas? Just kidding, no friends. But that's my East Coast bias. But maybe we would build in different areas but we didn't. And now to take a vibrant city like New Orleans or Miami or Tampa or in Connecticut, down on the coastline,
New England,
yeah,
all
right.
the way down.
It's impossible to do. So we are going to have to build in these areas. That's where commerce is. That's where the cities have grown up. That's where the jobs have been traditionally for a long, long time. So we need to find a way to build smarter in those areas. But we need to have flood insurance there for those people that decide to live there. And yes, I agree with you that after a while, after your home has been built and destroyed 7 times and the government keeps bailing you out, I'm okay with telling you, it's time to pack up. This is obviously a bad joint. But we cannot let, but we have to recognize that that's where the economy of the country is built.
infrastructure's there.
Infrastructure's
That's
there,
the
port
key.
jobs, there's gonna be vulnerable areas. You can move to Kansas and guess what, you're gonna have tornadoes rip through there every summer. I mean, there's earthquake zones, right? Natural disasters are going to happen. I don't wanna seem callous about it, but it's important for the government to make sure that it's affordable to live there. The private sector, as much as there's been talk recently about the private sector getting back into the flood space, it's great when you don't have a disaster. But as soon as something rolls in, ask our friends from Louisiana,
Yeah.
guess who's the first thing to pull out? State Farm is out of there, Allstate's out of there. The private sector
Yeah.
always pulls out because they're losing money hand over fist down there.
Give them the update where we are.
Yeah, so flood is this, we're in this constant state of kind of limping along from reauthorization to reauthorization. We're currently operating one until November 21st. I expect we'll get another one after that buys us a little bit more time, but there is a long-term 5-year reauthorization of the National Flood Insurance Program with some modest reforms in it that hopefully we'll get done over the course of the next several months. But we need it. Until, we're never gonna leave these coastal areas. We certainly would not advocate for that.
I don't want to either.
Yeah, no, we would not advocate for that. Yes, sir.
You mentioned Secretary Carson earlier. Could you speak to the NAHB HUD event on the mall, which systems built product was placed down the mall?
Sure, that was an interesting event for us, and it was cutting edge. So Secretary Carson asked us to participate with them. They controlled purse strings, they controlled the agenda, the invitation list, everything. But we were very instrumental in being the worker bees, basically, and pulling it together like nothing they had ever seen. So what we gained from that was a lot of attention and traffic, but this year we've been involved earlier and we've been asked to participate in one in the fall next year. Next year, 2020, we're in the fall, and we are going to be able to take a closer look and be more involved at how it will be set up, what products will be displayed and so on. Because we have to take that with what it allowed us to grow from in working with the Secretary himself and take it for what it was and what we were able to participate in at the time.
Yeah, it's just the kind of the origins of the event. So Secretary Carson came to the International Builder Show in February. We took him on a VIP tour of the show floor, and we took him out to the show village, and he had this aha moment of, wouldn't this be great if we could take the show village and put it on the National Mall and talk about housing affordability? Sounds like a great idea at the time, and then all of a sudden the Secretary pigeonholed Greg and our CEO and said, I really want to do this, and we pledged to help them do it. You have no idea how hard it is to do something like that in the National Mall. The U.S. Park Service involved took forever. But what we found was it was very hastily done. HUD wanted to do it in June because it's National Home Ownership Month. And we basically had 6 weeks to try to help them put it together. As Greg said,
And they had the Fannie and Freddie products, remember,
well,
getting
that was,
rolled out?
and that was a challenge.
that he wanted.
And we had a great conversation with Ken as your chairman, who came in and raised this very issue about the optics of that event. And we agree with you.
IRC product.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right. And I think a couple of things. One, the time frame, right? It'd be very. We talked to Ken about the logistics of trying to get that product on the mall and what would have to do to stage that to do it effectively. I think what it opened up for us is Secretary Carson is a fan of manufactured housing. There's no two ways about it. He thinks that is one of the panacea to the housing affordability crisis. We of course see that much differently. It's a multifaceted problem as we walked through this morning with you. So this has given us an opportunity to use that event to point to him of all the other things that he needs to do to make sure that the whole industry is taken care of. Yes, there is a role for manufactured housing, we get that. But there's also many other things that he needs to be doing for that, making sure that this industry is in front of us here, and the industry at large, regulations, labor, all the different things. So we've been having a chance to educate him about the differences between modular and manufactured, and all the different things that go into that, and finding those, like those different facets. So as Greg said, they want to do this again next year, and not in the spring time frame. They're looking more in the September time frame. Gives us a little bit more time to work to make sure that that all products are represented on the mall, and the programming is taken care of as well.
So much of what we do is this give and take. So you look, for the first time we have an administration that we're finding all these open doors, right? But as we've alluded to today, there's still many things that we do not see eye to eye, whether it's immigration or whatever the efforts are, we have to find the common ground and build from there. Not everything's far from perfect, but what we have the unbelievable opportunity right now is on both sides of the aisle. We have access, and we work very hard at it. And these are the types of things that it's a lot easier to address issues moving forward when you're moving forward rather than trying to get out of the starting blocks. So we take all these opportunities and try to grow.
Yes, sir.
So back to the tariff. It seems, from where I'm sitting, maybe a little short-sighted to look at, well, it added $1,700 to my house, is what the tariffs do now. But what's the long-term effect? If we don't do something and fix the trade imbalance, or you know, let's talk about all the things that are happening. What's that cost? Has anybody looked at that? I'm guessing we take a shot at your the NAHB guy. I like him, by the way. But he's an Ohio State fan, so he probably can't act right.
Oh, I see how this is going. He's not even here to defend himself. He's
Yeah.
not even here.
He didn't even bother coming to defend himself.
Right,
so.
that's right.
You guys take that back.
Yeah, we-
What's the long-term effect? Because I'm not looking short-term. I'm looking long.
You mean about just the trade, what President
Where we
Trump's
need to
doing
go.
to right size the trade?
$1,700 being added
Yeah.
to a house today
Yeah.
because of the tariffs. I get it. But if we don't fix that, what's the long term? Or we don't do anything, what's the long term?
Yeah. I don't know if we have looked at what the kind of if no deal is done, I think the tariffs stay. See, that's the rough part right now. I don't think this president ever unwinds all the tariffs. Says, you know what? Let's just go back to the way things were 2 years ago, which would So we're going to be in this phase of tariffs until we get to a trade deal. Now, I trust the president in so much that whatever the ultimate deal is, if they sign something in the next couple of weeks, let's say, if they do, then it's going to be a better deal than we had before this. And that's what we travel around the country, hear the same thing. The general feeling is that we trust the president to do the right thing. Yeah, there's some short-term pain here with the tariffs, but the long-term goal, and if I'm reading you're hearing your question correctly, is that there is an end in sight, and we'll all be better off for it.
See, so what they're asking us to do, and it's a tough ask, so we're a little different than the farmers around the country, right? They're asking. But for our industry to ask for patience and to fight through this, and oftentimes we find ourselves being challenged a little bit on where we can push back. But your question's a good one, and that's the challenge for Rob and his team, right? Where the balance is and what we need to do. It's interesting. Let me just also add one of the things that's been tremendously helpful for me and Rob going to Ohio State. So that's where he did his thesis for his doctorate. And what it was on is remarkable for what the data that I need for when I speak. He looked at the impact of the American dream, home ownership, on families and people around the country. And it's fascinating. He went to the School of Psychology and Sociology and Economics and Education and all these different aspects of what home ownership means. Why, when you own a home, when you enter the rental market at enough level where you can project what your dream is going to be moving forward, all the housing components that fit together, you're preserving your personal wealth, you're starting your involvement in your community, families tend to be closer, better educated, higher earners. It's just a wonderful parade and all true. And those are the types of things that we can use as building blocks moving forward as well. I saw other questions.
Going back to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, you guys just recently had a meeting with them talking about potential privatizing that. In the private market, will they reduce those terms, in other words, from 30 years to 20 years down to 15 years for those backstops? And is that going to be a concern that could be addressed? And the other aspect about that is that they're bureaucrats who don't really understand the cost and housing affordability and what it takes to build in a specific neighborhood or on a local level. And there's a huge disconnect from what I understand, what they think can happen and what's realistic.
I think the people that are running the housing finance sector for the Trump administration, so Director Calabria, Secretary Mnuchin, certainly, they're as conservative as they come. They put out a couple of documents about a month ago now, I think maybe 3 weeks ago, outlining their vision for housing finance and housing finance reform. And at the top of the document, we are going to preserve the 30-year fixed rate mortgage. They are going to have,
Which was a huge win for us.
They are going to preserve the federal backstop for mortgages in the country. Another huge win for us. The details are going to be where the devil is, as it always is. We're worried about the multifamily space. We're worried about rates going up as guarantee fees go up. We are worried about that. We're worried about shrinking the footprint of Fannie and Freddie and FHA specifically for those first time and move up buyers. So there's a lot of concern there. That said, I do feel very confident that we will still see a 30-year fixed rate mortgage, that the backstop for anything less than that, they're not going to drive down to a 20 or 15-year rate. There have been talk in conservative circles about that the real 15 should be the max that the government should back. I don't think that's going to happen. The other side of that is conversations we've had with Fannie in particular about an AD&C program, about them getting back into, I think years ago, decades ago, I think it was Freddie Mac had an AD&C, a secondary market for AD&C lending, or at least a pilot program. We're trying to get them to look at that again as a way
Start piloting.
To put some churn into the AD&C markets, so that banks are free to take those loans off their books, move them into securities, and keep making loans and driving down the cost of development loans for us.
Talk a little bit, though, about our game plan to take the decisions out of the administration and over into Congress because of how it levels it out.
Yeah, I think anytime you have government by executive order or government by just regulation without the backing of Congress, you run the risk of whipsawing back and forth between administrations. We have a Trump administration now, conservative by most accounts. In a year and a half from now, we could have a Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren, or Mike Pence if everything goes wrong in the next several months. We don't want to be whipsawing in the housing finance system between Secretary Mnuchin, who's got this vision for housing finance works now, and I can't even imagine what a Secretary Warren, Treasury Secretary, looks like. But we could have that, right? And we don't need the GSEs being bounced back and forth between ideologies. That's why my job is to get Congress to act on GSE reform and put those guardrails around what housing finance reform looks like, so that the regulators are bound by the will of the people, so to speak, the will of the National Association of Homebuilders, so to speak. Heaven forbid you should be a lobbyist in DC. But that's why Congress is really important. The reason why housing finance reform hasn't gotten done legislatively in the last 11 years is because it's enormously complicated. Tax reform is a walk in the park compared to housing finance reform, because there's not that many people who truly understand it. Talk about the long-term impacts on housing. If they get it wrong, you're going to melt down the economy. So there's always a reluctance to act. But we're trying to push them. That's our goal.
Yes.
Then that segues into, you talk about consumer debt, specifically student home debt. It's now impacting the millennials because availability of funds to be able to pay a mortgage is the key factor here. What's going to be addressed right now, what you're seeing that's related to student loan debt, any reforms, and what's NAHB looking at to be able to lobby towards Congress to help mitigate that, to make these millennials more, because housing affordability comes to what they have discretionary income to be able to pay it.
So you already see the age, right? Average age slipping back. One of the things that we're not big fans of is just wiping student debt off the charts. I mean, that doesn't make any sense for those of us that have done it, and our kids are still fighting with it and so on. But moving forward, it is real. One of the things I have to mention, though, as you were talking, so all these people that we're dealing with, the way that you picture them are true. Like when we meet them as regular people, like Secretary Mnuchin took our, it was back with lumber days, right? So he takes it and Then it was the chairman before me, so it was Randy Noel. He's talking, and he could tell that Secretary Mnuchin's just reading, and he's looking at the paper we gave him in the chart. He puts it down, and he had absorbed it and started asking the deepest questions you could imagine in a matter of moments. They really do live up to their what your expectations of their intelligence and the level that a Wall Street guy would have, and so on. You know, you look at Saturday Night Live this past weekend, and you look at the imitation of Secretary Carson. That's really, when you're looking at him and talking to him, these things are pretty accurate, you know. And the president, it's so funny to me because, you know, not many people get to see them face to face as many times as we do. Going back to Secretary Pruitt and others. But just to finish that topic, one of the main things that's talked about is the ability to get young people into the marketplace. And with those saddled with debt of all ages, but especially with this student debt component. And there's a number of theories that are rolled around and kicked around, but it is important that we allow them to enter into home ownership. And it's not a simple one-size solution.
Yeah, Greg said, I think forgiveness of student debt sounds good. It's great on the campaign trail. I think there's people like me who paid my 15-year debt down $130 a month at a time. I think yes, it's an issue, but I think the long-term effects of, okay, if you're going to forgive student debt, well, what's next? Well, let's just forgive mortgage debt, or and there's a challenge, I think, on the long-term effects of that. But I think the solution to student debt, frankly, is to drive down the cost of housing, right? If they have student debt because that's the way they finance their college, let's find them an affordable product that they can get into and recognize the dream of home ownership. And
is there an idea there that's coming about that the 30-year mortgage then could actually absorb?
Those are some of the theories.
Reduce their monthly payment as part of that? Tied to it?
Yeah, well, I've actually had those conversations where, right now they're at the think tank solution level. So it's like at staff level, and it's also at legislative staff levels where the constant ongoing talk, especially when you get to some of the camps that you would think are more active. So in New England, those talks are percolate much more than some of the other parts of the country, because we tend to be blue with our legislature, and Elizabeth Warren's right to the north of where I am, and you hear all those things. Let's let people into the country, and we'll give them health insurance and education and everything else. Maybe we could catch our own citizens up soon too, maybe. But there's all sorts of promises and different ideas out there, but it is a main focal point to keep our market going and to keep our industry successful. Another couple quick questions.
Along that line of affordability, where is progress being made to more regionalize the local zoning codes and take it out of the hands of villages and townships and people that are worried about getting re-elected when they approve something relevant rather than the greater good of the community in the area?
I haven't heard that percolate up to our area.
So what's happening is, where you see that mostly is the first step is actually trying to bring some of that up to the state level. So we have our state and local government affairs committee and group has seen a lot of potential model state codes, state laws, statutory framework to be able to take some of that local home rule and turn it into at least regional to start, and then move it up to the state level. I will say this, it's very slow in development because there's so many, I gotta tell you, every local kingdom, if you will, is very strong in their defense of what their rights are. And it is a nightmare in our industry, right? Like so in Connecticut, for example, we have 169 little kingdoms. And you can virtually 5 miles down the road go to a different town hall and have their prerequisites to being an anointed builder in their area. So it's a long uphill climb, but the answer to your question is there's always efforts at various stages of success going on, and we'll continue to fight that fight. We have to make it easier and less expensive for our efforts.
In Michigan, we just won a big Supreme Court
Yes.
on that, and I don't know if people here don't know, we took the
Yes.
city of Troy to court for, in Michigan, we have a law that the permits can only be the amount to actually, to serve that permit. In the city of Troy, they were actually, they subbed it out to another company, and that company was charging more, and they were putting that money back in the general fund.
Sure, they're supporting their town. Troy
So-
it was a little empire.
Right, so through our HBA, our state level HBA, we took them to the Supreme Court. It took us like 10 years to get it heard, but we got heard this year. We won. So that's going to take a little bit of, out of those, all those little mom and pop subcontractors now can be audited if they're overpricing and stuff, so that we have that option to go and audit them now. So we're working on that. Now on affordability, you know, we're talking it, but at the time we're talking, there's no walking, and you know, there's houses that are needed. So in the city of Kalamazoo, we partnered up with our HBA, and through our HBA, we've actually come up with an affordable house, and we call it attainable instead of affordable. But we're working now with the city of Kalamazoo, and we're going to build in the next 10 years over 100 houses, and it's through the back of the HBA. When they came to me, I'm the chairman of the Western Michigan HBA, they came to me that basically one builder has always built these, and then they subsidize it, you know, and the subsidy might be more than what the actual house cost.
Right,
So what we did is I took it to the city and I said through the HBAs where we got to work, and through all of our membership, 400 and some members, we brought the prices down where we can actually have an affordable house now, working together to do that. Because we're doing a lot of talking, but we have to actually, it's a today issue.
Right.
It's not a tomorrow issue. So working together with all of our members, we've actually brought down the pricing into like $140 for a square foot, typically $200, but we maintain the quality.
Yes.
Because we stamped it with the HBA, the prints are owned by the HBA, it's a local initiative, that way, we're trying to promote also the HBA is where you need to go to
Right.
get your builders.
So, and you said 100 planned homes for how long?
For the next 10 years, they want to build
10
10 to 12 houses, and some of them will always have subsidies. So what our goal was is also to get rid of the subsidy for maybe, you know, you have your young professionals that want to live downtown. Now you got to remember, we're building, nobody's built in 100 years.
Yeah, right.
You know, and they're land bank lots, okay? So they're basically, the payment on the land itself is very minimal, all right? But that's helping us to go back in. So
That's
we have
what
our
allows
first
you to
4
control
going in
costs.
right now is our pilot program, and it's been a great success. But it's through our membership that's the only way we can do it.
Good. See, those success stories are really what we like to compile, because like you said, is, you know, we work on this globally. It's those types of small steps that when we put everything together in these ideas that we can gain around the country. That's an excellent example.
And I hate to be the bad guy, but we do have to prepare for lunch. I want to thank Greg and Jim. Greg made a commitment to come and see this group a number of years ago when he was coming on board as 3rd vice chair. We haven't had NAHB's chairman in the room with us for a number of years, so a big round of applause for these two. So,